Hey, Larken Rose here, and I am here at Porkfest, and barely awake on the second morning with a million things to do, but I thought I'd record this video. While flying from Phoenix to Philadelphia, before driving from Philadelphia up to New Hampshire, a topic came to mind that I've thought about before and I've mentioned before, but I don't think I actually have a video specifically addressing it, so now I'm making this video. When people ponder the concept of a stateless society, things like air travel and air traffic control, or even just traffic, they often have this weird assumption that government is why those things are organized and safe. And that if there wasn't like regulatory agencies and specific rules, people would just be swerving around all over the place, crashing into each other on the roads, and planes would just be crashing all over the place. And it's sort of, I mean, when you put it that way, it's sort of silly, but to one degree or another, a lot of people sort of think, well, what would be the guarantees that we wouldn't have, planes racing to see who could land on the runway first and just ridiculous stuff. And often they talk about, well, the greedy corporations would cut costs and not be safe and stuff. And they don't seem to understand that the governmental oversight and regulatory BS, the only reason anybody wanted that is because people have their own self-interest. It's not like all the people are just totally careless and stupid and don't care what happens to them, and then along came this benevolent, all-caring, all-knowing government to make them safe. So I often have to respond to these questions with other questions and say, well, are you saying that you actually think that in the absence of a ruling class, let's take air travel for example, do you actually think that the people who own these multi-million-dollar aircraft won't really care that much if they crash? And the pilots who fly these aircraft won't really care. And the passengers won't bother to check and see if the airline has a track record of crashing all the time. And people don't get that people will find a way to serve their own self-interests and take care of themselves, even in the complete absence of regulation. And so people sort of think, well, if you didn't regulate the airline industries or trains or cars or roads or whatever, it would be chaos. And they don't get that people are going to figure those things out. But the second part of it is you don't need to know how they're going to be figured out. And people do this weird thing where they already don't know. I'm guessing the vast majority of you, and myself too, don't really know the details of how air traffic control actually manages however many thousands of flights happen every day in the U.S., and they're not crashing into each other. And they have all their protocols and, all the procedures they go through to get clearance to take off, get clearance to land, you go over here, you go, it's an amazing, just choreographed dance to have that many planes going all over the place constantly, nonstop, all over the country and all over the world. And it's way safer than traveling by car. The number of crashes is so dang rare compared to car crashes, and they're not crashing into each other, and every once in a while there's sort of a close call, but they managed to do this extravagant dance and make it work. And the incentive that made that work wasn't government saying, you go make this work. It was people wanting to not die. I mean, if you want to get right down to it, it's people wanting to not die. So the people who figure out how to do air control, they weren't congressmen, they weren't tax collectors. They were people going, well, we could do it this way and this way. We want several guarantees that you have to confirm several steps so that somebody doesn't accidentally do one thing wrong and make a complete catastrophe. So this guy will confirm with that, and this guy checks with the tower, and, you know, all the things they do. And I don't know the details of all the things they do, because that's not my job. But that's kind of the point, is when somebody doesn't know how all this stuff works, it can sort of seem like magic. Like, it sort of seems like magic to me, that air traffic control and that all the different airlines and the pilots and stuff, they have their own codes, they have their own language they speak, and, you know, things can change, and things do change constantly. Well, there's a weather front over here, and this plane wants to go around it, and air traffic control will go, okay, you're cleared to do this. There's another flight over there, and we're going to make sure you don't crash into each other. I don't know all the codes and details and procedures and protocols they use to make that work. And guess what? I don't need to. Because the plane I'm in is flown by somebody who doesn't want to die and owned by somebody who doesn't want to lose a multi-million-dollar aircraft. They might even not want their passengers, customers, to die too. But I don't need to know how all that stuff works. But there's this weird tendency that if people think that government is making those things work, then they think that the absence of government will mean just utter chaos. And one of the best examples was there's a YouTube video about this somewhere. An intersection somewhere in England, or somewhere in the UK at least, I'm not sure which part, where there was an intersection that was always backed up, and they were always having like accidents and problems, and with their, you know, all the signals and stuff were backing things up. And somebody made just ridiculous suggestion, just remove all the signals and all the signs and literally have it be anarchy. So nobody has any guidance. They just come up to this thing and they're like, okay, I have to make sure I don't crash into people. And they did that. I'm astounded anybody let them do that. And everything got way, way better. The number of accidents plummeted. The number of backups plummeted. Because the human beings in their cars that don't want to smash their cars and don't want to die, who are coming up to this intersection, are suddenly like, oh, okay, I have to sort of be careful and make sure I'm not crashing into people. And the self-preservation of all those people, even without like agreeing on anything ahead of time, worked better than the government signals. Now, I'm sure there's lots of intersections that wouldn't work in. I'm not saying remove all the traffic lights, but there's a lot of places where that would actually make it better because people's self-preservation kicks in, and then they're like, okay, now we have to be careful. Now, this already happens, and I've watched this happen. Like, I grew up in Pennsylvania where they have storms and trees fall over and they knock the power lines down. So places will be lacking power, including the traffic lights, for a significant amount of time. And I've seen what happens immediately after the power goes out, which is everybody jams on their brakes and goes, okay, and then people take turns crawling through and everybody's going slow. And like, there are better ways to do it than that, but it still works pretty dang well because people realize, wow, there's no guidance from the lights. The lights are all off. So we have to just be careful. And I've never seen an accident at an intersection where the lights were off. I've seen plenty of accidents at intersections where the lights were on because people are just deferring to, oh, there's that thing, wah. And if some dumbass didn't notice the red light, this person's like, well, my light's green, wah, crash. Over and over and over again. I can't count how many times I've seen that. And that same careless idiot who ran the red light may barge through a intersection with no lights on. Or they may not. They probably just weren't paying attention. They weren't trying to run a red light. They're not death wish. But they may still be stupid, but the other people are watching out for them. Like, is anybody coming? So in a lot of cases, it actually makes it more dangerous to have, well, here are just the indicators. Somebody else is deciding for us. We don't really have to worry about that. And every single time, literally every single time, the power goes out, eventually the cops show up to manually direct traffic and make everything worse. Every single time. I have never seen a cop show up to direct traffic and have things get better when the power's out. Never. It always makes it worse. It stresses people out. It slows people down because the cop is there going like this and people are like, I don't know what the hell that means. And he's like waving people around like, am I supposed to go? And everybody's confused and nervous because like, I don't want this dumb fascist to give me a ticket because I didn't know what this meant. And I've seen that over and over again, and they don't show any indication that they're like even trying to convey like useful information. That, oh, I have to do this again, go this way. And then they yell at anybody who doesn't understand them. And it literally makes it worse. The authority figure shows up and makes it way worse. Now, that's an example of all the way just free for all, nothing planned ahead, no signal ahead of, and no planning ahead of time, which there's a lot of things I wouldn't do that with. Like I wouldn't do that with air travel. Just, I don't know, just take off and try not to hit anybody. That would probably work too, but it would be kind of nerve-wracking and a little bit less predictable. So I'm not saying, I just don't plan anything. I'm saying even when people plan nothing, the self-preservation of almost everybody kicks in. And the thing of, even my dad many years ago, when he was a conservative and I was an anarchist, he was like, well, what's to stop people from driving on, just driving on whatever side of the road they feel like? I said, the fact that they don't want to die? He was like, well, yeah, I guess so. Like, if the custom where you are is you drive on the right side of the road and you repeal the laws saying people have to do that, they're all going to do that anyway because they don't want to crash and die. And the problem is when things get more sophisticated and people don't, because people can watch an intersection and go, oh, people are just figuring it out. And the masters of this are in places like India, where you may have seen like the YouTube videos of giant intersections of very highly populated, crowded areas, and there's no lights and vehicles are just sliding through each other. And I've seen smaller examples of this in person in Mexico, and I'm not used to that, so I wouldn't want to drive there because I'm not used to, I just sort of go in, and it's basically the equivalent of like in a busy mall and people are walking and you just don't bump into each other, you just walk around each other, but they're doing it with huge vehicles, which would be nerve-wracking to me because I'm used to just, well, you drive in this lane and then there's a light. But people learn how to adapt, even in a case where I think a little bit of guidance would probably help, but they're amazingly efficient, and it's amazing how rarely they get into an accident when there's a zillion vehicles and pedestrians and bicycles and just everything going through this intersection constantly, just nonstop for hours, and they just weave in and out and go about their merry way. But again, that's a completely unguided, unplanned, every man for himself. So even every man for himself, people's self-preservation makes them try to not die. But with something like air traffic control, like a zillion planes flying around, the fact that you don't know the details of how that works, and I don't know the details of how that works, doesn't mean nobody cares. It doesn't mean nobody's going to do it. And the fact that you think of air traffic control as a government agency now, because it's a government agency, it doesn't mean that if government falls over and disappears, suddenly nobody cares anymore about their planes crashing and the customers dying, and the pilots are like, well, it's 50-50 chance I'll make it through this flight, but I'll do it. Like, they're not going to do that. They're going to find a way to make it safe enough that they dare to do it, or they're not going to do it. And they're going to find a way, partly because there's a financial incentive. There's money to be made offering people a way to get from here to there without dying and without paying too much of a ridiculous price. And it isn't just travel. It's a zillion other things. And people are like, well, what about this? And so the excuse of making things safe, and so we have to have government, we have to have like standardized rules that are controlling all these things, is just skips the fact that people don't want to die. Like building codes is a big one. Well, people build buildings that just fall over. It's like, do you want to live in a house that falls over? Or if you're paying to build a house or you're building your own, would you kind of go out of your way to make sure it doesn't fall over? And if some idiot wants to build a crappy house and it falls on him, like, I don't have the right to forcibly stop him if his self-preservation isn't good enough to keep him from dropping his house on his own head, okay, but I get to decide whether to go there. And if somebody says, well, we have this apartment building that like is creaking and waving in the breeze, it's like, okay, no thanks. And the idea that you can make anything perfect and perfectly safe, like, okay, there's no chance that anything's going to go wrong, that's silly in almost any context. Like, the fact that we have these giant machines that fly through the air for thousands of miles and almost never crash, like thousands and thousands of flights, and every once in a while there's one that crashes. That's kind of miraculous. And the notion that it would just be chaos without government doing it is completely silly, because no, it won't, because self-interest still applies. Now, there is a bit of truth, which you can see instantly happen with the intersection example. People will suddenly have to start thinking more. Because right now, and it's funny because this is a perfect counter argument to the thing, if we need government to do this. Right now, people think, well, if I buy this in a supermarket, it's got to be healthy because there's regulators and stuff. Like, if they manage to get into a supermarket, it's got to be okay. These pharmaceutical medicines, they must be okay, or treatments or thing that I can't mention on YouTube without it getting banned. They must be safe because it was approved by the government. So instead of viewing the world as if, well, it's kind of my responsibility to not get my butt killed, and then there's still points at which you have to trust other people, like who made this product and where's this coming from. And then you have things like consumer reports and reviews of people saying, yeah, I use this product and it does this annoying thing, or this one's great, or whatever it is. But now people think that, well, if it's on the market, it must be safe. And how many zillion recalls have there been, not only of medicines, but a million other things, which is where somebody made something, it was approved and cleared, and then they found out, whoops, there's something kind of not good about that. And one of the indication, and people think, well, the greedy corporations will try to sell you stuff that'll kill you. But if you think like somebody who's not an economic imbecile, even if they're completely greedy and selfish and callous and sociopaths, if they want to make money, they have to please their customers. And one demonstration of this is there are a huge number of recalls by companies that didn't originate with the government. They just got some customer complaints that, yeah, in my car, this weird thing happens when I do this and that. And they're like, whoop, quick, recall that and loudly tell everybody, okay, if you have that in your car, bring it in, we'll fix it for free. Government didn't make us do this, but we don't want word getting out among our customers that says that, oh yeah, there's this known problem, and they decided not to do anything about it. And sometimes that happens, and then word gets out that, yeah, they decided not to do anything about it. But often they're ahead of even the government regulations because they want their customers to feel safe using their products. Whether it's a car or a sandwich or you're flying on a plane or whatever it is. So there's an economic incentive to A, not kill your customers, and B, in a free market, there's that incentive. There actually isn't as much in a controlled market. Because Big Pharma is like, well, nobody else is allowed to make this crap. If we kill 1 million of our customers, who cares? We still have a monopoly because government stomps on anybody else who wants to compete with us. So the oversight and the regulatory stuff, and we just saw this for several years, not only does it not make things safe, it makes things unsafe by, first of all, being able to get paid off so that they can assure everybody, not only is this safe, but you should totally take it. In fact, we're going to terrorize you into taking it and ruin your life until you take it. And then go, oh, it turns out wasn't really that useful, wasn't that good, wasn't that safe, caused a whole bunch of problems. But hey, we had government force on our side, and we could pay off the FDA and the CDC to say, yeah, this is great, everybody should totally take it right away, and make the Big Pharma $30 billion. Meanwhile, a lot of normal people are thinking, well, if they approved it, it must be safe and it must be useful. And if the experts are saying it. And in a free market, there isn't the incentive to be lying psychos, because if word gets out that you lied to your customers and endangered their lives, your customers leave. It's only when government force says you're not allowed to leave that it removes the incentive. It removes the power of self-interest and self-preservation that normally is going to govern a whole lot of an economy. Like, well, that doesn't look safe. I'm not buying that. And I have to decide for myself. And the thing is, you don't have to decide everything for yourself. There's things like Consumer Reports and a million other things. I mean, that's been around forever. And then there's like UL Listing, Underwriters Laboratories, that's just goes back forever. And their job was, we just review things. And if we go, yeah, this is safe, and we put our label on it, now everybody can go, oh yeah, that company that's known for reviewing everything and make sure it's actually safe, they gave their stamp of approval. It's a free market way for people to like exercise self-preservation without having to like individually research everything themselves. It's like, oh yeah, all right, that company, which is, been shown to be trustworthy, says that this toaster isn't going to blow up and kill me. All right, good, I'm going to buy this toaster. And so the problem is that people don't really think at the level of sophistication and complexity that human behavior actually functions at. They just sort of think, well, everybody's going to do what one person tells them. And that's not really how it works. And you can see it in traffic patterns when the lights fail, and in a million other ways. But you can also see it in very organized, pre-planned ways in the free market that don't require government regulation. So there's so many things. And like people saying, we need governments regulating the banks. Like the banks have this monopoly on their counterfeit system entirely because the government gave it to them in 1913 with the Federal Reserve Act. And then people are like, well, we need government regulating them some more because they're doing these nasty things. Okay, government's there with lots of regulations. Are they still doing the nasty things? Yep. Are they literally having government rob all of us to give them billions of dollars when they screw up and collapse? Yep. Like, how much faith do you have in government oversight of like the banking industry when first of all they enabled the fraud that is the entire system, and second of all they'll just outright rob you to give billions of dollars to these huge banks when the banks fail? It's like, do you really think government is keeping you safe and looking out for you when they'll just directly rob you openly right in front of your face to give billions of dollars to the biggest corporations and banks in the world? Like, they don't care. And I'll end with this. That's the thing that people don't get. They just sort of hope that government has their best interest at heart, even though there's absolutely no reason to think that. Even without hundreds of years of experience to show that government doesn't give a damn about you and will absolutely destroy your health or your life or your property or your savings or anything else to serve the rich people who own them. But people want to think, well, Big Daddy, Big Mommy government is taking care of us and looking out for us so that we don't have to. And if that wasn't there, it would be chaos. You literally have a thing there that's looking out for the interests of people who are trying to rob you and exploit you. And then expecting that without that, normal people wouldn't find ways to not die and not endanger themselves. And it's such a weird attitude. And again, it's another example of how I think a lot of people are going to have to learn by example. They're going to have to actually see people living in a stateless society and go, oh, they're not like going to unregulated restaurants and dying of food poisoning constantly. Because it turns out restaurants don't want to kill their customers or scare them away. Gee, who'd have thought? And so a lot of people, because they're so used to thinking of babysitter government as the only reason we can get along and the only reason anything's safe, some of them are going to have to learn through experience and learn by example by other people showing them, yeah, our normal self-preservation and ability to organize and cooperate will make everything safer than what government does. Now, there's some things that you're allowed to do it even if they're not safe. I mean, people already are allowed to do a bunch of things whether they're safe or not, and that's your own choice. If you're only endangering yourself, have at it. Be my freaking guest. But when it comes to endangering other people don't want to be endangered. When they find out, they're going to do lots of different things to make that not happen. And it doesn't mean it'll always be perfect, but I mean, what we have now is far from perfect. But they can't be bought off. Like, nobody can bribe you to not care about whether you're going to die or not. Whereas they can bribe regulators, here, push this thing too. We know it isn't safe or necessary, but we want you to push it on everybody, and here's a few $1 million to do it. That can happen, but you can't go to the individuals and say, this treatment is really bad for you and it's dangerous and it's unnecessary, but we're going to pay you to take it. Like, what? That wouldn't make them money, and nobody's going to fall for that. So, but again, the dynamics are complicated enough that a lot of people just have this simplistic view that, like, well, government makes everything safe, and we mere mortals wouldn't know how otherwise. And the reality is just obviously the opposite of that. But a lot of people have a hard time imagining that. So I suggest to those of you who think, there'd be total chaos if we didn't, regulate traffic, literally study go watch some of the videos of, the intersections in India, and there's places in Asia where they're just swerving in and out, in Mexico, and see that even where there's no guidance and there's no control, and it really is a complete free-for-all, even then, with no planning ahead of time, people's self-preservation makes them learn how to do it without dying. And I'm not saying we shouldn't ever plan ahead, but I'm saying even when we don't, it works better than government. And study the phenomenon of traffic intersections when the lights fail, and see how often that literally makes it safer. And then a cop shows up, and see how often that literally makes it worse when an authority figure shows up and, I'll tell people when to go. And then there's huge backups and people are going, because nobody knows what this means. And so if you study how human behavior actually works, once you get a grasp on that, you'll definitely give up the notion that the presence of government is the thing keeping us safe from anything, because no, it's stinking isn't.